Barack Obama speaks. So too does Fred Armisen. Also a story about flat beer, although not necessarily in that order. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace. In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizdal. January the 12th, Tuesday. Glad you could be with us, everybody. It says right there in the Constitution, the president shall, from time to time, give to the Congress information of the State of the Union. Today is the day, the last such day for the incumbent, President Obama's 7th State of the Union address. To get a little context and a little behind-the-scenes perspective, we've called the guy who used to write these things for a living, but whom we usually talk to in a different context. James Fallows is a national correspondent at The Atlantic. Jim, it's good to talk to you again.
Kai, thanks. My pleasure.
These speeches, as you well know, are usually laundry lists of proposals, of budgetary foreshadowing, I guess you might say. Do you expect that this time around?
The word from the White House is they're going to try to do something different. Now, we have to discount that by saying that every president before every State of the Union says he's going to take a different approach because people know that the sort of the tedium of these speeches. But I think there is a better than even chance that the president will do it a different way this time because the main point of State of the Union is to ask the Congress to do something. And President Obama well knows the Congress is not going to do anything he asked them to do. So he might as well take a different approach of saying, here's the big picture of thinking about our place in the world, our place in economic development.
He will point out, speaking of economic development, he's going to, I can't imagine he won't, say, listen, the economy's really good. We got jobs. We're on the cusp of real growth. You're welcome, basically, right?
Yes, I think there's two intertwined themes he's going to be trying to pull together in this speech that he's been doing piecemeal over the last year or two. The most difficult one involves terrorism, where he's going to say, I know everybody is really alarmed about terrorism. We've had this horrible episode in San Bernardino, but actually, if we keep this in perspective, it's not as fearful as we think. That's something which he may – that's a dicey thing. The other one he's going to try to do, I think, is to say that, of course, we recognize all the ways in which the economy has not improved, the people who are still feeling strained, the median income under pressure, et cetera. But let's look at what the last 7+ years have meant. And I imagine he's going to really take some time on that theme.
So here's a convoluted question. The speech is in the House chamber, arguably to the Congress, but really to the people of the United States. Last chance at a big audience for the president. What does this speech, do you think, say about us?
Interesting. It's in the now decades in which I've been watching these since I worked on them for Jimmy Carter long ago, it's become more a sort of celebration of presidential pomp and power. And I think if you looked in Roman imperial terms, it looks more imposing that way, even as presidents have become hamstrung. I think there is a kind of, if you wanted to have a touching Gary Cooper-ish view of American life, you could say that at least once a year, the public sort of pays attention to what its elected president is going to say, even if people disagree with him, even if they're giving low approval ratings. And starting with Bill Clinton's term, ratings seem to show that the more detail a president went into, the larger the audience grew. So if you wanted to make that rare positive case for American civic spirit, you could say the attention given to a State of the Union speech might be a little thread of evidence on that side.
There will be political theater in here, right? One of which will be right at the top. He will say the State of the Union is, and then some variant on good, right? I mean, we know what's coming here.
It is. And sometimes George W. Bush made a virtue out of always saying the State of the Union was strong. And other presidents have found ways of saying strong at getting stronger, challenged but on the way, et cetera. I imagine the president will kick that off as saying that it's maybe stronger than we anticipate. And there's a stagecraft detail here. Either presidents use that right in the beginning of the speech to set up everything, or they have it as the dramatic coda. People know that line is coming someplace, and we wait for it.
You talked about writing these speeches for Jimmy Carter back in the day. Was this a fun speech for you to write, or was it a grind because everybody and their grandma in the government wants to get something into this speech?
Yes, the State of the Union is an important speech, but for that very reason, it's one that speechwriters just dread because the entire government has the entire year to think, put in this sentence about Bangladesh, put in this sentence about rural electrification. And if you do that, then their budget process becomes so much easier. So it is every speechwriter lives for the announcement President Obama has given. This will be a different kind of State of the Union address. If he can actually make good on that, that'll be something.
James Fallows is a national correspondent for The Atlantic magazine. Jim, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Kai.
Couple items before we proceed with things. $29.93 was the low of the session for crude oil in New York today. That is, of course, per barrel. Don't know if you remember, but yesterday I said there was an analyst. It was somebody at Morgan Stanley who said crude would hit 20 before it hit 40. Today, the good people at Standard Chartered called oil falling to $10 a barrel. So there is that. Also, Christine Lagarde, the head of the International Monetary Fund, said today she thinks interest rate increases in this country need to be, and this is a quote, gradual, lest they hurt emerging economies. We'll find out what Janet Yellen thinks of that. The next Fed meeting is January 26th and 27th. I would say the odds of another hike then are fading. Wall Street, on the other hand, rallied today. First time all year, really. Details, numbers, you know the drill. Show of hands here. Who has heard of the Apollo Education Group? Yeah, not so many, right? Most of you likely, though, have seen ads for the for-profit college chain that Apollo owns, the University of Phoenix. Apollo announced this week it's considering selling itself in a deal that could be worth $1 billion. Like a whole lot of for-profit colleges, the University of Phoenix has been grappling with stiffer regulations from the federal government, falling enrollment, and its share of recruiting scandals as well, which does oblige one to ask, who's going to buy this thing? From the education desk at WYPR in Baltimore, Maryland, Marketplace's Amy Scott has that story.
At its peak 6 years ago, the University of Phoenix enrolled around 500,000 students. Last quarter, there were about 177,000.
The biggest issue has been that the for-profit companies grew so fast for so long, they frankly got fat and happy.
That's analyst Peter Appert with Piper Jaffray. He says for-profit colleges got into trouble with regulators for aggressively recruiting students, many of whom didn't graduate or couldn't get jobs that paid enough to manage their loans.
And the net result is the companies have had to remake themselves.
The University of Phoenix has closed campuses and cut degree programs and plans to be more selective in admitting students. Ben Miller is an education policy analyst with the Center for American Progress. He says a sale to a private equity firm would give Apollo more time to turn around.
When Phoenix is reporting every quarter that it's got thousands fewer students, investors are just hammering the price. And so if it can go private, it gets some breathing room.
One interested buyer, according to reports, is the coincidentally named private equity firm Apollo Global Management. No relation yet. A spokesman had no comment today. Piper Jaffray's Peter Appert says Apollo Education is still fairly attractive. As a mostly online college, it's not that expensive to run, and it's growing overseas, where regulations are looser.
The fact that you've got a big market with potentially some growth associated with it, with high returns on capital, would definitely attract the attention of private equity buyers.
College turnarounds have been tried before. A competitor called Education Management Corporation was taken private in 2006, only to struggle when it reemerged as a public company a few years later. I'm Amy Scott for Marketplace.
You got your lagers and your ales and your stouts, your pales, your pilsners, and your reds. Also, apparently, you got your flats, non-carbonated beers, usually quite high in alcohol content, more like spirits than beer, which means you can open, reseal, and revisit as you like, as you would with, say, a bottle of whiskey. Spike Carter is a contributor to Bloomberg Pursuits. He's got a piece out about some noteworthy versions of flat beer. Spike, it's good to have you on.
Thank you, Kai.
I have so many questions about this. The first of which is, Do they brew it bubbly and let it go flat and then sell it, or do they brew it flat?
Well, no beer is really brewed flat. Bubbles, carbon dioxide, that's a product of the fermentation process.
All right, fair enough. So once you get a bottle of it, you pour it. What does it taste like? I mean, does it taste like a nice, solid, IPA or beer or whatever?
I would say they're almost under the beer umbrella by name only. No, I would say they kind of recontextualize what you think beer could be, period. But also they run the gamut, some being more like wine, some being more like fortified wine, and some being more like full-on spirits.
Can I run down to my local Piggly Wiggly and pick up a case of this stuff? I mean, how available is it?
Almost none of these, really. And the most available is got to be the Sam Adams Utopias at this point, which is now an annual release. But that also has a suggested retail price of something like $200.
Oh.
Yeah. But I think this approach is a little bit more like a filmmaker or something like that making a black and white movie or a silent movie, or essentially using historical practices as a point of inspiration.
Right. I'm a big beer guy. I like beer, as listeners to this program know. I am not, however, going to go out and spend $200 on a bottle of Sam Adams Utopia, whatever it was.
Right.
Who are these brewed for, then?
Well, first of all, I think that they definitely can thrive in the context of restaurants, and places that are pushing certain boundaries with food. And because of the nature of the production of these bottles, a lot of the time you're talking about maybe at a minimum a year from brewing to bottling, or in some cases, like Utopia's, portions of that blend can be like 20-year-old beer. It's such an oddball that they mostly live and thrive at brew pubs themselves.
Spike Carter writes on craft beer and some other things as well for Bloomberg Pursuits. Spike, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Kai.
Coming up,
Oakland has become culturally important in a way that it wasn't in the .com.
turns out there is a there, and it's in high tech. But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Industrial is up 0.7% today, 117 points, closed at 16,516. The Nasdaq took home 1%, 47 points, 4685. The S&P 500 advanced 0.75%. That is 15 points, ended things at 19 and 38. Financials did the slip and slide before finding their balance today. J.P. Morgan Chase deposited 0.2%. Citigroup traded up a fraction of 1%. Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs all ended, flat. On the healthcare front, Anthem jumped more than 5% after raising its 2016 profit forecast. The joy was contagious. Aetna climbed nearly 4%. Cigna pushed up 3%. United Health ended the day more than 2% higher. We told you about Apollo Education and efforts to take it private. The possibility earned high grades from investors. Shares up 15%. And you remember all those problems plaguing Lululemon? Gone. Shares in the maker of yoga gear stretched almost 4%. After a strong holiday season, upbeat profit forecast as well. You're listening to Marketplace. This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. Fred Armisen, known best probably for his stretch on Saturday Night Live and Portlandia, of course, has a new project, something a little bit different, still in the broad comedy category, just at least in part in Spanish. Más Mejor, it's called, a project to reach Latino millennials with comedy where they live. That'd be online. Fred, thanks so much for coming into the studio.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Tell me now, in addition to all the other things you do, which is a boatload of them, you're doing Más Mejor. What's up with this?
It's part of Broadway Video, and they've got this
Lorne Michaels and that gang. Yeah.
Yes, and they have a company called Above Average, which is like they do a lot of online content and comedy. So they're launching a Latino version of it. Some Spanish speaking and some bilingual content comedy. And Lorne and the company asked me to get involved, and I couldn't wait to do it. I've always been wanting to do Spanish language entertainment.
How come?
My mom's Venezuelan.
Okay.
And I've just always been fascinated by Latin comedy and Latin TV.
Is it different than Anglo comedy and TV? It's got to be, right?
Definitely. But because I can't figure out what it is exactly, that's why I just want to attack it somehow. Like, what is this? What is this entertainment? What are, the Sábado Gigante and all the shows like that?
Yep.
I'm like, they have huge audiences. So since we are so close culturally, I mean, I feel like it's just one culture pretty much, the United States and Latin America. I'm like, where is that bridge? Where is that point where there is Latin entertainment and American entertainment?
There are those who will disagree about the whole one culture thing, but that's an entirely different conversation,
yes,
right?
Yes,
but it's also a huge business opportunity. I mean, Telemundo and Univision and all those guys are going after this young Latino millennial audience that is also bilingual, right? I mean, they all speak English, or many of them anyway.
Yeah, what I'm finding out, which was kind of surprising, is that how there is like a separation between the amount of people who want to speak more Spanish and who want to speak more English. I went to Mexico City for this recently.
Wow.
And I just want to know what that world is. We have our preconceived notion of what Mexican culture is,
right.
and then there's what the actual culture is, and the culture of comedy. So I went to this one stand-up show, and already I was wrong about what I thought it would be. So it was really funny. These stand-up comedians were very similar to the kind of comedy you did see here in Los Angeles. And so much of it is such a huge question mark that's what I'm enjoying about doing this.
I should have asked this at the beginning. You obviously speak Spanish. Do you
Yes.
have like street Spanish? Can you go and hang with the guys when they're doing slang in comedy clubs?
Claro que sí. Oh, slang. No, slang is different in that I feel like each city has a different slang, just like it would be in this country.
Yeah.
So yes, I speak Spanish, but when I go to places like Mexico, it is different than the Venezuelan Spanish.
So how are you going to translate that into the audience in this country, right? Because you're going to want Venezuelan comics, you're going to want, Argentinian comics, right?
Yes, I'm going to pick a place. So I'm fascinated by Mexico City most of all.
Okay.
I have no Mexican heritage whatsoever. Something about that city is what I want to portray. But I went to this one area, the Condesa, which is kind of like the sort of Silver Lake, Brooklyn,
yeah.
Portland part of Mexico City. And I'm kind of a chicken culturally.
Really?
Yes.
That just surprises me.
I like staying in an area that I recognize and know. I like a nice hotel. I don't venture out. So I felt very safe and comfortable there. But that's the area that I want to explore, the area that has the bookstores and art galleries and record stores. It's all about comedy in that world.
You are a guy, obviously, who came from Saturday Night Live. You've gone on to Portlandia and a bunch of other things. But you have a sensibility. You have a comic sensibility that when I watch you, I'm like, oh, yeah, classic Fred, right? I mean, we know what that is. Can we expect that out of you when you're going to find these new folks?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to do it without me being necessarily in these pieces. Only because I've done so much of it. And as I see people like Amy Poehler, and Tina Fey have these other shows that they're not in, I think I've got to start doing that. I really want to write things that star other people and in the Spanish language.
That is so interesting. What is it that has made you say, I have to get myself out of the equation a little bit? Because that's what's going on,
it's
right?
uncomfortable. Because I'm very comfortable in front of the camera. I love doing it so much. And I think that might not be the healthiest thing. I think it's good to just try to reinvent yourself all the time. I think because all of my heroes did that. They just jump into this other place that people might not be familiar with. Who knows? Maybe something good will come out of it.
Fred Armisen, thank you so much.
Thank you. Mucho gusto.
I don't even know what to say. I could do Chinese, I could do French, can't do Spanish. Oakland, California, on the eastern side of the San Francisco Bay, has largely been ignored in the hue and cry over the boom in high tech that part of Northern California is leading. San Francisco and Silicon Valley, slightly farther south, get most of the buzz, but that is changing. Uber bought a historic building in downtown Oakland not too long ago, plans to move 3,000 workers there. Other brand-name tech firms are showing up, and Oakland even has its own startup culture. One might say there is a legitimate renaissance underway in Oakland. But as San Francisco well knows, tech-driven growth, it changes a place. Our senior tech correspondent Molly Wood reports.
Oakland has a cool history of music, art, manufacturing, cocktails. You know, the Mai Tai was invented here. And the tech industry isn't just discovering the city across the bridge from San Francisco, it's choosing it. I met Jesse Pollock at the weekly community dinner hosted by Clef, an 8-person startup that makes security software. He's one of the co-founders.
We didn't really like San Francisco and wanted to find a new community that was more aligned with our values.
Clef has hosted over 100 dinners since it moved here in 2013. Everyone is welcome. The goal is to make friends and be good citizens.
One of the things we feel in Oakland is that we're 15 years behind San Francisco, which is a good thing because it allows us to look at San Francisco and be like, oh, they made so many mistakes, right?
San Francisco has been skewered for giving huge tax breaks to bring in tech companies and for letting the rich take over the city. And it's become the symbol of everything wrong with the tech boom. Daryl Jones III is Clef's head of business development. He feels the pressure, like when he's out at a bar and he gets this.
Hey, you work in tech? What's going on, man? I'm like, dog, we're trying. We're trying not to be terrible. We're trying to be better for the city.
Oakland's new mayor, Libby Schaaf, actually has a name for this whole trying to be better thing.
Tequity.
That's tech and equity.
Tequity is this idea that we can have a different kind of tech community here in Oakland.
She says the city doesn't bend over backwards to attract tech. Uber received no incentives to come to town, and there are no built-in tax breaks for tech companies.
5-10 years, I would really like to see Oakland tell a unique story of how an economic boom could not just exacerbate inequities, but heal them.
Some 16 tech companies have moved to Oakland in the last few years, according to CBRE, a commercial real estate firm. Uber, the biggest, says it will have 3,000 workers here by next year. A fifth of them already live in Oakland, along with thousands of other highly paid tech workers who commute to San Francisco and Silicon Valley.
Oakland has become culturally important in a way that it wasn't in the .com.
Dan Harvey is vice chairman at CBRE.
What we're seeing is a tremendous move of the restaurateurs, of the artists, of the musicians, of the entertainment scene that was deeply embedded in San Francisco that has made a move east across the bay into Oakland.
But Oakland's renaissance has also taken a toll. Cedric Brown is chief of community engagement at the Kapor Center for Social Impact.
There is a crisis here around housing. If we don't figure that part of it out, then we're going to continue to see the kind of displacement that goes along with the tech industry having a bad reputation for rewarding the wealthy, rewarding these boy geniuses.
The clock is ticking. Residential rents are now the 4th highest in the country, according to the apartment listing site Zumper. Home prices are up 13%, and the average one-bedroom apartment is more than $2,200.
Do you agree that affordable housing is important? Yes! A little louder.
Yes! In November, protesters gathered on the steps of Oakland City Hall to demand a fee on new business construction, a fee that would go toward more affordable housing. Francine Williams is a longtime Oakland resident.
We need the affordable housing impact fee so that we can stop gentrification that's going on.
Mayor Schaaf says a fee is coming, and even without one, Oakland extracted $1.8 million from Uber to go toward new housing. That's one small step toward tech equity.
I have to be honest and say, of course I'm nervous. There is no great model that I can look to and say, see, it was done here.
Right now, all she can see is the model across the bay, the one that gets just a little bit closer to Oakland every day. In Oakland, I'm Molly Wood for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, in which those who don't remember history may well be condemned to repeat it. Business Insider is reporting that a couple of private equity groups are working on a bid to buy American Apparel out of bankruptcy. Working with company founder and former CEO Dov Charney, I ought to say, the same guy who was fired amid charges of harassment and discrimination and all-around ickiness. although that last thing was not actually cited by the board in its letter of termination. I mention this, A, because it's kind of amazing, but also B, just as a cheap ploy to get you to check out my interview with Charney from a couple of years ago. Amazing might be the only appropriate word. Marketplace.org, of course. Seriously, check it out. Dov Charney is a piece of work. All right, the Dow up 0.7% today, 117 points. The NASDAQ took home 1%, about 47 points. The S&P 500 advanced 0.75%, that is 15 points. Caitlin Esch is the producer on our Wealth and Poverty Desk. Our digital producer is Tony Wagner. The senior digital producer is Nishat Kurwa. I'm Kai Rizdal. We are back again tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.